dangers for this world.
The war in Ukraine can seem like chaos.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said his country is going to support the pause as well, but later Zelensky said Russia had launched a barrage of drones toward Ukraine.
Russia is claiming Ukraine targeted a key airbase in a massive drone attack overnight.
Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of launching air attacks that destroyed civilian infrastructure early on Wednesday.
Russia just woke up to its worst nightmare yet. Ukraine launched hundreds of drones straight into Moscow, causing chaos, explosions, and panic. And with President Vladimir Putin furious, what does this mean for the war? Will Russia hit back?
Officials in Moscow say hundreds of Ukrainian drones have targeted the city in what appears to be the largest attack on the Russian capital so far in the war.
Flights have been suspended at Moscow's Sheremetyevo International Airport following a series of drone strikes. Officials say that at least 91 Ukrainian drones targeting the Russian capital were shot down.
Let's jump straight into it. It was a scary morning for Russians as Moscow was hit by countless drones after Ukraine's most recent offensive attack. Residential buildings, military depots, factories, and even power plants. You name it. The Ukrainian army spent their time plotting this attack as Moscow went up in flames, witnessing earthquake-sized blasts. Believe it or not, this is by far the largest drone attack ever on the capital. And with 91 drones downed alone in Moscow, it's rumored that at least 3 people have lost their lives, with another 20 injured. It's estimated that Russia's airspace had at least 350 Ukrainian drones, leading to a short lockdown in 4 of Moscow's airports. Oh, and these weren't your ordinary drones either. No, sir. I think it'd be more appropriate to call them flying bombs. And while Ukraine has managed to catch Putin off guard, what does this mean for the future of the war? I'll get to that in a bit, but first, let's look at the aftermath of the drone attack. What was Zelensky even thinking? I mean, launching a blown-out offensive operation on the day of negotiations? It makes 0 sense. And it would have made at least some sense if the drones were programmed to attack military targets, but residential buildings and parking lots? Whether you like it or not, it's highly unlikely Putin will let this operation go unanswered. Also, here's something you may not know. Some of the most brutal fighting in any war only occurs when there's the possibility of a peace deal in the future. It's true, and it's mainly because each side tries to gain the most leverage right before sitting at the negotiation table. But blowing up homes? Now that's dangerous. Look, at some point, you have to realize how this is more than just picking sides. Innocent people are having their houses shot up. Just look at the footage. This isn't some military base or zone. It's your average neighborhood in Russia. Both countries are pretty much playing with fire at this point, and like I just said, this is more than just picking sides. But this recent attack just makes you wonder, is this conflict anywhere close to its end? Honestly, after this, I'm not sure. I am hoping it doesn't turn into those decade-long conflicts. I mean, just look at the widespread damage. Another residential attack claiming civilian lives. I don't even think these were manned drones, to be honest. The fact that they were falling all over the place, hitting houses and residential buildings, is proof alone. The Ukrainian army probably just sent them all flying in Moscow's direction. And trust me, with nearly 400 kamikaze drones in the sky, a good percentage of them are going to hit the target. What worries me the most is how people are starting to pick sides, even when it comes to civilians. War is evil, and no one, Russian or Ukrainian, deserves to lose their life over the conflict. But, yeah, it must have been similar to a doomsday event for the Russians in Moscow. No matter where you went, there was either a fire or a busted drone. Nothing else. Some of the drones failed to hit anything and crash-landed on the side of the roads, lighting up trees and greenery. Some of them dropped straight onto cars, causing multiple explosions near crowded residential buildings. And some of them flew straight into the buildings themselves, setting a whole new level of Ukrainian offense. And what's interesting is the attack took place in different phases. Yep. It's not like Ukraine sent hundreds of drones flying toward Moscow all at once. Because trust me, that would have been a disaster. The damage would have been much greater. The attack started sometime around midnight and went on well into the day as drones could be seen flying all over the capital. We don't have the exact number yet, but Russia recently confirmed that there were at least 337 drone attacks all over the country. Damn, 337 drone attacks in just a matter of a couple of hours. Let's hope those peace talks get going soon enough, because if they don't, Russia might end up responding in the most brutal way ever. The visuals coming out of Russia are not good, people. Check out this footage that emerged after several drones flew straight into an apartment building. Just imagine being inside your home when, all of a sudden, a massive drone blows up right outside your building. That must be a terrifying feeling. According to local authorities, 7 apartments were hit as 3 people lost their lives, with another 3 injured. Is this just a game of tit for tat, though? Let's not forget Russia also launched a drone attack on Ukraine a couple of weeks back, hitting a residential building and injuring 7 civilians. In fact, I think it's important to clarify something here. This is the largest attack in 3 years, not the first. Both sides have been using kamikaze drones for years now. Anyway, here's what the attack looked like from the outside. Yep, it's pretty obvious to tell that it wasn't just one drone. That's clearly a squad of drones that flew straight into this building. And you know how I was saying these were most likely unmanned drones? Well, I hope I was right, because if this was actually an attack, both sides are playing dirty. Ukraine has long accused Russia of targeting civilians, but it looks like they're doing the same now. Or let me rephrase that. Both sides have been playing dirty since the start of the war. Don't believe me? Here's a Ukrainian drone attack from September 2024. That peace deal better work out because even though this has been going on for quite some time, it's become very frequent. Both sides are unwilling to back down. And as the war enters a new stage, they've also started ignoring the rules of the game. Thankfully, no lives were lost in this devastating attack, but it did lead to a horrifying retaliation effort. And that's what's worrying me the most right now. What is Russia plotting? Will it set a new precedent? And are peace talks once again off the table? Also, you need to consider how this is no longer about Russia or Ukraine now. It's about all of Europe. The recent Ukrainian attack has put 50% of Moscow's fuel supply at risk. It's obvious Zelensky and his generals wanted to hurt Putin with this one. They targeted the largest oil depot in Moscow, with the hit on the Druzhba pipeline creating an international ripple effect beyond borders, as fuel exports considerably dropped. So any country getting their fuel from the massive supply line might have a beef to pick with Ukraine now. And sure, this is war, military targets and key infrastructure sites will always be a high priority target. But Ukraine's recent attack is only fueling the already deepening energy crisis. On a side note, how does something like this even happen? I mean, how did Russia not see this coming? 337 drone hits in a single night? Well, believe it or not, this was actually a part of Ukraine's larger strategy. Remember how Ukraine destroyed a significant number of Russian air defenses in Crimea? It forced Russian generals to relocate other systems, exposing Moscow to such a big drone attack. But after the Druzhba pipeline hit, countries like Hungary are in serious trouble, having to import much more expensive fuel and gas from allies like the USA and Norway. And that just makes you wonder, was this a part of their plan? Is Ukraine trying to reduce Europe's energy dependence on Russia? We don't know for sure because the attack could just be for ceasefire leverage. How? Well, you see, since much of Russia's air defense systems are misplaced, it allows Ukrainian drones to travel deeper into their territory. Critical infrastructure sites are also at risk now, and one more hit would add some serious pressure on Russia's energy hold on Hungary. Putin would have to back down since he can't risk having Hungary switch to other countries for energy, as it would seriously hurt the Russian economy. Continued strikes would most definitely strain Russia's economy and geopolitical dominance, pushing it towards an early ceasefire negotiation. But the question still stands: will there be retaliation? There's no other way to put this. Ukraine hit Putin really bad. Several cities were up in flames, with Moscow taking the most damage. And sure, I get the whole ceasefire angle and how Zelensky wants to pressure them into early negotiations. But is Putin seriously going to let this go unanswered? Economic and geopolitical strain is one thing, but there's no way Russia is about to let Europe think it's hostage after just one large-scale drone attack. And the rules of the game are clear now. With both countries having a strong backing, the only way to win this war is by destroying infrastructure. Whoever can take more hits for longer will emerge victorious, unless Trump's peace talks bring some fruit. Or not. Video, play news report, as no relevant footage is available for Russia's most recent attack. The question is, can Putin be trusted? While Trump believes it's possible to convince the Russian president of a ceasefire, European nations think otherwise. And rightly so. Just hours after Putin agreed to halt strikes on Ukraine for 30 days, he hit them again, and hard. It all started back on the 18th of March 2025, as there was a glimmer of hope after Donald Trump engaged in a nearly 2-hour-long phone call with Vladimir Putin. It was decided that Russia would halt attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure for 30 days, possibly even leading to lasting peace. But this verbal accord died down in just a few hours after Russia launched a series of drones and missiles across Ukraine. The eastern city of Sloviansk was plunged into darkness as hospitals bore the brunt of the aggression, leading to emergency evacuations. And while no casualties were reported, the damage to the infrastructure was unimaginable. Ukraine's president, standing alongside Finnish executive Alexander Stubb in Helsinki, highlighted the disparity between Putin's assurances and Russia's actions. Now, Zelensky claims Ukraine is ready for a genuine ceasefire. But as of right now, it seems like both nations are falling right back into a blown-out war. But at least there's some good coming out of it, right? I mean, we did see 175 soldiers from each side released, thanks to the help of UAE facilitation. President Trump is scheduled to speak with Zelensky again to navigate the escalating tensions and explore potential pathways to a complete ceasefire. But will it be as successful as the last? Sure, his previous attempt at diplomacy made a lot of headlines, but the Kremlin's mixed messaging has fueled speculation that the limited pause was merely a strategic maneuver. The swift resumption of Russian drone strikes raises concerns about Moscow's real intentions. Or at least, that's what the Ukrainian president thinks. We've seen this playbook before. Every pause in Russia's aggression is just a moment for them to prepare for the next wave of attacks. But how do things go from here? Does Zelensky have an upper hand? And is Putin losing his grip? To answer these questions, we'll have to go back in time. For more than 2 decades, Putin has ruled Russia with an iron fist. His control has been absolute, tightening censorship, crushing opposition, and positioning himself as the ultimate leader of Russia. But in recent months, cracks in that image are becoming harder to ignore. This isn't the first time Ukraine has embarrassed Russia on the battlefield. In fact, Ukraine's ability to hit back every single time has been one of the most shocking twists of this war. Like in 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, everyone expected it would be a swift victory. Military analysts predicted Kyiv would fall within days. But what do you know? Ukraine held strong, forcing Russia into a humiliating retreat from the capital. And then came 2023, when Ukraine finally launched its counterattack, reclaiming occupied territories and exposing Russia's military vulnerabilities. And now, in 2024, Moscow itself is under attack. Ukraine has taken the fight directly to Putin's doorstep, with the latest drone strike being much more than just military warfare. It's actually a psychological blow. Because last I remember, Isn't Russia supposed to be the aggressor here? I mean, how in the world did Ukrainian drones reach the heart of Moscow? And look, I know Russia had the last say in the latest attacks, but I'll keep coming back to this. How did Ukraine manage to get so deep into Moscow? It definitely raises an alarming question. Is Russia truly in control here? And while Putin continues to project his strength in public, there are growing signs that he's starting to lose his grip. Many analysts and experts believe the latest drone strikes have forced him into an uncomfortable position. Or in other words, not only did he agree to a ceasefire for 30 days, but he violated his own agreement with the White House just hours later, proving only one thing: Ukraine hurt him. He had to get the last say, otherwise, his decision to ceasefire might have been taken as an act of weakness by Europe. And if there's one thing we know, weakness in Russia is dangerous. There have already been so many signs of tension. Remember when the Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin openly criticized Russia's military leadership before his mysterious death? Mysterious? Sure. On the other hand, Russian nationalists have demanded more aggressive tactics, blaming Putin for being too soft. Well, that's definitely a first. And lastly, sanctions and war fatigue have damaged the economy, making life harder for everyday Russians. So, yeah, even though Putin was able to squeeze in a last-minute attack to get an edge in the ceasefire, his position isn't as secure as it once was. And if Ukraine continues to hit hard, internal dissent will only grow, and Putin may soon face his most dangerous enemy yet. Not Ukraine, his own people. But what about Zelensky, though? Is he going to push harder? What will be Ukraine's next move? For starters, Ukraine now finds itself in a fascinating position. The recent drone strike on Moscow wasn't just another attack. It was much bigger. It sent a clear message to the world. Ukraine is no longer playing defense. For years now, Ukrainian forces have been facing an uphill battle. At the start of the war, they had Western support, and countries that had once been quick to send weapons in the early months have grown hesitant. The reason? The fear of escalation and public backlash. Citizens of ally nations have started accusing their governments and leaders of funding a war by sending weapons of mass destruction to Ukraine. It's gotten to a point where some Western leaders have even suggested that Ukraine should negotiate with Moscow instead of pushing forward. And just when you thought that was about to happen, the drone strike changed everything. President Vladimir Zelensky fully understands the weight of this moment. This attack forced the world to refocus and realize one main thing: Ukraine doesn't need permission to strike back. And in a way, this was the message they were trying to send out as well, especially after that heated meeting between Zelensky and Trump. But, yeah, for the first time in years, it finally seems like the momentum is shifting as Russia got caught off guard by an attack on its own soil. Perhaps that was the reason Putin agreed to a temporary pause on strikes against Ukraine's energy infrastructure in the first place. But of course, that didn't last for very long. And I think I need to clarify something here. Even though Putin violated the ceasefire, it never applied to other targets. The pause only applies to energy targets. This means Russia is bombing and will continue to bomb civilian areas, military positions, and contested regions. So what options does Ukraine have as of right now? Well, they could take a temporary pause in fighting to rebuild, rest, and regroup. Or they could seize the moment and strike even harder, launching a major offensive while Russia is momentarily distracted. It could backfire, though. These strategies only work if Putin stays on the defensive. If he does what he's been doing since the start of the war, Ukraine may find itself on the back foot in no time. Plus, Ukraine has a stakeholder here, and it's not the people. It's the Western allies who are starting to hesitate, worried that Ukraine has just escalated the war too aggressively. And for Russia, this is a shocker, no doubt about it, but it's not that big of a moment. Moscow has more than enough resources to launch a counter, but if Ukraine does it and fails, it's going to give Russia a clear advantage in the next stage of the war. Ukraine must decide now. Is this the right time to go all in? Or will pushing too hard bring devastating consequences? Either way, one thing is clear. This war is far from over. And in case things do escalate, will NATO step in? Well, as of right now, they've been carefully balancing their involvement. For over 2 years, Western leaders have tried to walk a fine line. How far are they supposed to go in their support for Ukraine? They've provided weapons in a controlled amount, but haven't sent any troops. That just goes to show you that the goal has always been the same since day one: to help Ukraine fight off Russian aggression without being dragged into a direct conflict. But after the latest attack on Moscow and Putin's ceasefire violation, everything feels different. Suddenly, the war isn't just about battlefields in Ukraine, it's reaching Russian soil. And that spells trouble. The next couple of weeks will be crucial as NATO will have to decide. Is it going to revisit its strategy and finally back Ukraine to the fullest? Because as of right now, they've been very selective in what they provide. Long-range missiles? Some, but not too many. Wouldn't want to upset Putin, right? Modern fighter jets? Yes, but slowly and only under strict conditions. Ground troops? Absolutely not. This just goes to show you that NATO fears the same exact thing as everyone else. Don't let Putin see the support as an act of war. But the entire picture has flipped now after Ukraine ventured deep within Russian territory, hitting residential buildings, energy depots, and military targets. So, what happens if NATO gets involved? If they do cross the line from supporting Ukraine to actively fighting, the consequences will be massive. NATO would probably drill hard, launching airstrikes on Russian positions located in Ukraine. It would also be a major upgrade for the Ukrainian army as they'd be getting more advanced weaponry. Or in other words, everything they've been asking for, including long-range missiles, advanced drones, and even direct intelligence for attacks inside Russia. But if you're going to corner the Kremlin, you better expect some retaliation. What would Russia do if the war escalates? Simple. If Putin feels cornered, he's going to take out NATO supply routes in Poland or even target military bases in Europe. And you know what that's going to mean, right? NATO's Article 5. An attack on one member is an attack on all. And I don't think I need to tell you where things go from there. But yeah, if NATO enters the war, there's no telling where it ends. And just a conventional war alone between Russia and NATO would be devastating, so I can't even tell you how the risk of nuclear escalation would skyrocket. Oh, and in case you're still waiting to see what Trump might do about it, well, I think he's made his position on Russia very clear. There are even talks about lifting some of the sanctions, so it's possible the USA, under the Trump administration, might stay quiet and risk Ukraine losing ground. Anyway, as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues to evolve, expect to see several critical developments in the coming weeks. Key areas to monitor would probably be Ukraine's new military strategy and Russia's justification for the recently agreed ceasefire in targeting energy infrastructure. And of course, we're also going to have to keep a close eye on potential shifts in NATO and Western involvement. Striking Russia's capital has definitely shifted the water, and more strikes challenge the perceived invulnerability of Russian territory, possibly even affecting Russian public opinion and morale. And by continuing to target areas within Russia, Ukraine may pressure Russian forces to divert resources to homeland defense, potentially easing pressure on Ukrainian fronts. Every single action carries significant risk, and escalating attacks on Russian soil could and most probably will provoke serious retaliation, both militarily and politically. And about that lengthy phone call with President Donald Trump, it seems like that 30-day halt was just another play out of Putin's book. And even if Trump is able to convince Putin to stick to it, the agreement has its own scope and limitations. I mean, while it prevents Russia from hitting energy facilities, it leaves other critical infrastructure and civilian areas vulnerable to ongoing attacks. It could also just be a tactical move by Russia to alleviate international pressure without having to make substantial compromises on the battlefield. It might be Russia's way of asking for 30 days to regroup for further offensives, but it definitely undermines trust, along with complicating future negotiations. Maybe that's why Zelensky doesn't want to negotiate in the first place. On the other hand, NATO is waking up as well as peacekeeping proposals have already been discussed, with the option of sending peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. This, of course, won't be perceived as peacekeeping by Russia and will only increase escalation. It might just end up hesitating Putin even more, forcing him to plan a counterattack so powerful that it will silence Ukraine once and for all. All in all, it's a tricky situation, as only time will tell how things will play out in the next few weeks. But here are some things to watch out for. Will Ukraine launch another strike on Russian territory? Will Putin stick to his 30-day pause? Or is it just another distraction? Will NATO and the West have to change their approach? And while no one has the answers as of yet, trust me when I tell you, it's these three questions that will shape the course of this conflict in the coming months. Anyway, that's it from my side, people. So, what do you think? Did Ukraine cross all lines after a blown-out drone attack on Moscow? And are we about to see a whole new level of escalation in this war? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.